Everybody should take some responsibility for their own enjoyment of the game, but the Dungeon Master does bear a large weight, and that's part of the social contract. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but there is an unspoken social contract that suggests that the DM does have the greatest share of responsibility for the enjoyment of the game. The hardest part of creating a homebrew is to have a clear vision of what it is that you're trying to achieve with your homebrew. You can approach it from a number of different angles, and I think the way that most people approach their homebrew, and it's not necessarily the best way. That being said, I'm not sure that there is a best way. But a lot of people will approach a homebrew from the point of view that they just start creating something and then they create a little bit more and they widen it out and widen it out. They start off with a town and they move out to a city and they move out to a region and they move out to a continent, they move out to a world, and that's how they create their homebrew, starting from this sort of a point and moving outwards. Whereas my own take on creating a homebrew is to say, well, I'm going to have a theme. And my theme is going to be an examination of a central question. The central question is going to be something important to me, like how can we incorporate feminism into Dungeons & Dragons? Or how can we bring back the sacred feminine into the world? So that's sort of my take on it. And then I will create my world based around those core ideas to begin with and then build outwards from there. If you're anything like me and you love building worlds, you're going to create copious amounts of details that are going to fill pages and pages of books or spreadsheets or whatever it is that you're using, to the point where you can lose track of it. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself reinventing the same stuff more than once. I've done that, where I've created descriptions of some order or another, and then come back later and gone, oh, wait a minute, I've already got a description of this order. Oh, they're slightly different. I have to collate them and work them back together again. The hardest thing to adjust to 5e. 5e introduces some mechanics that I was not initially familiar with. I mean, despite the fact that I was aware of what THACO was and some of that anachronistic stuff that came from AD&D and what have you. You have actions and bonus actions and reactions and opportunity attacks and all this sort of stuff. This was all kind of new to me when I came to 5e. I was like, what's this stuff? How does this work? Honestly, every edition of AD&D has one core issue, I think, which is probably the worst part of the whole system, which is the magic system, especially for wizards, is quite silly. This idea that you have spell slots and spell levels is quite silly. Why can we not just have spell points and you just spend more spell points to cast more powerful spells? It's very simple and very direct, and it works in hundreds of other games. The spell slot system in D&D is a bit absurd. I know where it came from. It came from a novel that I think Gary Gygax read at the time, and he thought it was cool, and he incorporated that. What I like about 5th edition is how simplified it is. It's people have complained about its oversimplicity, especially people that play 3.5, but in all honesty, I don't think that's really a problem. I mean, I can play a game with a stick and a piece of string and have fun. If the system is simple enough, you as a DM and you as a group of players can make it as complicated as you need to. If it's too complicated, it's going to get bogged down in rules and dice rolling and what have you, and you're going to have to stop the game and look stuff up, and that just gets in the way of having fun, in my opinion. So the better system is the simple system that has flexibility for role-playing. I bought Tasha's Cauldron of everything last night on D&D Beyond, and I had a bit of a look inside it. I like so far what I see. I enjoy the tattoo ideas. I've enjoyed some of the new magic items that are in there. I mean, the new artificer thing, I don't like artificers, so I'm never going to play an artificer, and you're probably never going to play an artificer in my game, so that's irrelevant to me. But never mind. I hope the people that do like playing artificers enjoy it. It's just not my thing. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of new character subclasses that look like they could be really interesting to play. The whole new lineage system, background system, and sort of origins system in Tasha's Guide, I think is a fantastic idea. And it's about time. There's been a certain amount of controversy about that. I don't really understand why, because it's optional. That means that you can choose to use it or not use it. It's up to you. All you have to do is use your brain. So it's optional. So there really is no controversy about the new system at all. Because you can choose to use the old system if you don't like the new system, or you can use parts of it, or you can use it to reconstruct the system that was already there, except that now you've used the new system to do that. So it really isn't a problem. What it does do is it means that you can play characters that you like, that you can flavor your characters in ways that are how you imagined your character, so that you have more options. So it's all about options. It gives players more options, and we all like more options. So it's fantastic. And anybody that says otherwise is a moron. Sorry, that's just how I feel. I probably can't use that part. Yeah. I think now you can adjust your stats to play into your background a lot better. You can actually create a character where you've got a background that is set up in your mind a certain way, and now you can create your stats and your bonuses for that character in a way that reinforces that. I mean, people have gone into great detail about this stuff, and I don't want to tread the mill again. But obviously you can now have a dwarf that casts spells. You can have a wizard dwarf, and you still have to justify that. It's not like you don't have to justify it. You're not just like suddenly all dwarfs are wizards, because that's just stupid. Clearly your dwarf is different to all the other dwarves, and that's why he's casting spells and what have you, he or she. On the other hand, the DM now has the flexibility to say, well, in this world, all goblins are good and all goblins are really smart. And the DM has the option to create that world and do that, and there's actually a system for it. So this gives players and DMs more agency to play the game the way they want to play the game. It gives them license. They have been authenticated to do this. Essentially, you've been given a stamp of approval by Wizards of the Coast to play the game how you want to play it, which is how most people were playing it anyway. But now you've got the seal of approval to do that, which is nice. So now you can create your tank elf. You can spend more time on your backstory, and in fact it encourages you to spend time on your backstory, because now you've got a reason to create a backstory and you've got a place to start. Why does my elf have such high strength? Well, that begs a question, doesn't it? So now you answer that question, and in the process of doing so, you've just created a backstory. Ta-da! Like magic. It's inspirational. Given circumstances. Where am I? What does it look like? What does it smell like? Smell is a good one. You could use a soundtrack, piece of music can work really well. When I begin my games as a DM, I like to start with things like, you can hear the rain outside. It might be the very first thing I say as a dungeon master is something about the weather. Set the scene. Set the scene for yourself. And remember that as a player, you can ask questions, and you should ask questions, because the DM is your five senses. So ask questions to fill those details in, because that's going to set the scene for you, and that's going to put you on the ground in the game. As far as getting into character, imagine, what are you wearing? What are you carrying? What's in your hand? What does your hands look like? Imagine your character's body overlaid over you, like a kind of an image of yourself, of your character over yourself, like a mask or an astral body even. So yeah, those are the ways that you might go about it. You might think about, what does my character look like? What is their mood? You could use an image that you might have in your mind from a movie or something, like you might remember a certain look that a superhero has at a certain time in a movie, and you pull that into your mind and use that as your inspirational point, your jumping off point. You can do things like put your tongue in a certain position in your mouth, or you can find an expression that a character has, that the character always has, in the same way that you might have a phrase that you might say to get into character. You might also have a frown or a raised eyebrow, I guess Spock, for example. But role-playing is, to me, acting, and acting is about behavior. So taking little snippets of behavior that you can find. Is there a coin that you like to toss? Is there do you like to sharpen your blade? Playing actions is useful. Every actor plays actions. You have inner actions and outer actions. Your inner actions might be something like brooding or amusement or something like that. And your outer action might be something like lighting the campfire or sharpening a blade or something like that. In every scene, you can be doing something. You can literally be doing something and playing out that thing that you're doing. Whether you say to the DM, I sharpen my blade as I do the blah, 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 or I say blah, blah, blah while I'm lighting the campfire. Or you can literally be sitting there acting it out. and talking at the same time. And you'll find that by talking and playing actions together, you come across more naturally, and it will add to your role-playing significantly. If you are pretending to whittle a horse with a knife and a piece of wood while you're talking, it's going to come across, it's going to reveal character, it's going to reveal plot, and it's going to reveal theme. First of all, it's revealing character. You're whittling a piece of wood into a horse. Where did you learn the skill, and why are you doing that? It's revealing theme. The theme perhaps is the horse. It's revealing plot because you're talking and whatever you're saying is connected to the plot. So there you go. Plot, theme, character, all in one thing. Having an objective is pretty useful. If you don't have an objective in a scene, you're going to flounder around without really knowing what to say or what to do. You're going to be very reactionary. Now, to be fair, there are characters like that, but they're usually not the main character. And in D&D, especially Dungeons & Dragons, you are supposed to be a hero, and heroes are pretty universally proactive protagonists. So having objectives is really important. So your objective could be to get from here to the next door in the dungeon, or it could be to save the dragon from the evil princess, as Matt Colville likes to say, or it could be to save the kingdom from disaster, or it could be to find your birth mother, or it could be whatever. An objective could be as simple as, I want to convince the guard to let me through the gate. It could be, I want to get over the wall, I want to get into the city. But having an objective is pretty useful, because if you've got something like that to latch onto, that will help you drive your scene forward. With, for example, I want to convince the guard to let me through the gate, you'll see how that has a super objective that's above that and higher than that. The super objective is, I want to get into the city. Getting into the city probably has a super objective too. Why do you want to get into the city? I want to get into the city because that's where the mark is that I need to assassinate, or that's where the magic item is that I need to recover for the faction that I work for, or that's where my father lives and I've come to visit him after 5 years of being away at the war in the West. So having objectives, important. Objectives and super objectives. So at the beginning of the whole story, Gandalf's objective is to convince Bilbo Baggins to go along on this big quest to get the dwarven horde back off the dragon. Gandalf's super objective is to save Middle-earth. In actual fact, objectives and obstacles are almost the same thing. This is not necessarily true of super objectives. One thing I think that is a mistake that people make is that they choose super objectives or objectives that are actually obtainable. And I know that probably sounds counterintuitive, but if you've got an objective that's obtainable, there comes a point where you've obtained it, and now your character is left empty, and that's the end of the story, and there's nothing more to be said. If you have an unobtainable super objective, it's kind of tragic. It's kind of, there's more pathos. My super objective is to stop the war in the West, or my super objective is to stop war. Right? They're quite different, and one is quite a lot more serious than the other. And one is quite unobtainable, and the other one is obtainable, possibly, but they're quite different, and you'll sort of get a sense intuitively of the difference between those two things. So if a player came to me in my world, Sidariel, for example, where elves and orcs traditionally just don't get along, they generally hate each other, the player decided that their super objective was to unite these two opposing sides, these two factions, to cease this endless war between them. I would certainly allow them to take that as a super objective, but I would have to say to them, okay, so we have to work in some part of the story where you realize that this is something that you want to do and that this is something that you can do. You're not just going to take this meta idea that I want to be a good person and do what's politically correct in our world, and take that into the Dungeons & Dragons world and just decide for no particular reason that your character wants to do these things. Your character is actually going to have to understand why this is important and that it's possible. Your character might be an elf who realizes by direct experience that orcs are not evil and that they are just socialized the way they are, and they're socialized differently, and that you as an elf have been socialized to hate them. And once you make this realization in character, now you have a reason to have a super objective, such as uniting the two opposing parties. As for how you would go about that, yeah, I would certainly create situations and design a whole story arc around that. In fact, just quietly, there already is one. But that's we won't talk about that. Okay, so when I want to create a character, the first thing I think about is who are the players and who's the DM and what's the world. Because First of all, I don't want to create the character that everybody else has already got. So if we've got, we don't want 3 paladins in the game. I'll also think about, for example, are we playing Rime of the Frost Maiden, or are we playing Eberron, or, these are going to make huge differences to the sorts of choices that I'm going to make. It's also going to be things like, have I recently played a wizard, or have I recently played a paladin? I mean, I haven't played a wizard for a long time. I'm really itching to play a wizard right now. So right now, that's going to be one of the first things I'm going to think of. But if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would be really itching to play a paladin. So it's got to do with a cycle of playing different characters as well. So there's that. So having flaws as a character means that you're going to have vulnerabilities, and that there's going to be times where you're going to be a drama magnet. And I don't mean that in the way of being a drama queen, but in terms of things are going to happen to you and you're going to have to overcome them. Personally, I start thinking about voices, but that's just me, and I don't think that's something that's really that important. It's just I find that by talking to myself in character, and that will actually inform me of elements of self, because the character might start talking and the character might start answering questions and telling me things. And that's quite useful. There is no right way to make a character. There is absolutely no right way to make a character. Or is there? Maybe it might be more accurate to say that there is no wrong way to make a character, but then again, maybe that also could be incorrect. I think there's a lot of good ways to make characters. I think there's a lot of bad ways to make characters. The best way that I know of for me to make a character is to start from the inside and work my way outwards. Some people might decide they're going to play a certain type of character. They're going to work from the point of view of, I need to have a tank in the party because the party has got damage dealers and a healer, so we need a tank. And they might think of it from a mechanical point of view, and then they go about min-maxing their character, basing everything on how can I do the most damage or take the most damage, and all the mechanical elements first. And then they might get around to creating a background and a story for that character and their name and what have you. I'm not against that approach, and there are times when I'm playing with people who I don't know very well where I might take that approach. On the other hand, my preferred method is to start from the inside and say, well, I want a character who feels this way about stuff and has this sort of background, and these are his or her background traumas. And I like to play characters that are traumatized. I like to play characters that have flaws. I like to play characters that are not perfect, that make mistakes, that have made mistakes, that have dark pasts or histories or things that are going to catch up with them in the future. That have interests in things that are likely to get them in trouble, because this gives the Dungeon Master a bunch of ammunition that he can use to create drama and conflict and all of that good stuff. So if you like this video, please hit the big red button and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the